I think privacy is, for a person, is the space that you have that no one has access to, the space to not be watched, the space to not be listened to by anyone, the space to do things that you want to explore on your own, maybe even to explore thoughts that you haven't thought through completely before you want to share them with other people or with the world, maybe. Privacy also is a traditional perception of privacy, maybe, of being naked in your room without anybody watching, and the privacy to be with certain people without others being aware. Basically, the way to be without being surveilled. I think privacy and freedom of expression totally coexist. They need each other. The freedom of expression to me is part of being able to express myself in a way that nobody controls what I say, how I express myself. And already by thinking that I am being watched by those who I don't want to watch me at that moment, I think my freedom of expression is already constrained. So I think that really relates to each other very much. Of course, there's this other perspective saying that if you want to protect some people's privacy, then you need to constrain other people's freedom of expression. And you could almost go into the difference of political thought or political culture between, for example, the American idea of freedom of expression and I don't think there's something like a European perception of freedom of expression, but I think some of the European cultures have a different conception of what freedom of expression means, which doesn't so much focus on the individual's absolute need to have this freedom at all times, but more on the group and how everyone needs to have space without constraining somebody else. And obviously, being German and being European, not obviously, but my perception of that is that I think that you always need to make sure that by exercising that freedom of expression, you don't oppress somebody else. Meaning, I think to me, freedom of expression doesn't mean that I need to have the freedom to be as racist as I want to be. Because I think that is not my idea of freedom of expression. That doesn't have to do anything with privacy, but maybe I'm trying to explain why I think it's totally okay to have a right to privacy and to therefore restrict in some way the freedom of expression of others. When, for example, it comes to taking a picture of me in my home, I would think that is something that many people understand, that the freedom of expression or the freedom to take pictures at all times needs to be restricted. I think that picture explains a little bit why maybe in other forms of expression it would be okay to respect other people's privacy. And it's a difficult debate to draw the line. I think there is no clear one definition of where that line needs to be drawn. I think that is a debate that each society needs to have and probably needs to have several times. The question whether there is a balance between internet freedom and surveillance implies that there is a need for surveillance, and I don't see that need. I don't think there is a necessity to surveil. I just don't think, and therefore I maybe I have trouble to answer that question, because for me I don't see why we should have a balance in there. I think internet freedom, which in itself is difficult to define. I think what that actually is and for whom and in which ways and how humans and technology interact, maybe. But surveillance to me is being monitored in a way that you don't want to be monitored by either state or private actors. And I understand that there's sometimes technical needs for surveillance, because you need to surveil systems for them in order to work. And already there to draw the line between that technical need for surveillance and the maybe political or enterprise type of surveillance that we face a lot and that is being discussed a lot at the moment. That line is difficult to draw, but I think it's very, very important from my point of view to make sure that that other kind of surveillance doesn't happen. Do people care about online privacy? Yes and no. I mean, some people do more than others. So that's impossible to answer in a way, because everybody is different and there's all varieties of how much people care. And there's people who hardly touch the internet because they care about online privacy so much, and then there's others who don't seem to care, or even follow this ideology of post-privacy, that we need to share as much as possible because it's unavoidable that everything will be accessible for everyone anyways, which I don't buy into. So there's the whole variety, and I think what we're talking about is these people that everyone has a perception of, who are sharing too much, who are oversharing, who are not aware of the implications of all the information that they give away. And I tend to agree with this. On the other hand, I think people care about online privacy and are not aware of what actually may be done with all the information that they give away. I mean, there's so many who follow very much this feeling, I have nothing to hide, I can share my family pictures, I can share my social security number, not realizing how dangerous that might be, and what actually may be done, and what the difference is between feeding some information into a form of your bank maybe, and feeding the same type of information into some company that just wants to increase the details of the profile that they build about you to sell that. And that's very difficult to assess for many people, because they don't know what can be done with this. So I think if they knew, they would probably care more. And then on the other side, often you don't really have that much of a choice, because if all of your peer group has a certain behavior using a certain application, you don't really have a choice to not do it without being isolated within the people that you want to be with, and not having that choice of actually having the same kind of service from a privacy-aware company or service, or one that really just wants your data to build a profile that can be sold. To not have that choice doesn't say anything about whether people want online privacy, because they may want it, but they do not have the option. Well, do people have the right to give up their right to privacy? I think everyone should have the right to do whatever they want, perfectly within a certain collective or agreement within society to not step over certain boundaries, of course. So if people feel they don't want any kind of privacy, who am I to tell them not to, is my point of view on that. I personally don't think it's a very wise choice, but I'm not going to ask for a society that exercises that kind of control. So what are the effects of mass surveillance on human rights? I think there's, again, a huge variety of implications. One is that mass surveillance has an effect on every human being, and this has been shown many, many times, that people, when under surveillance, behave differently than when not. Already there's studies watching people in a room with no pictures on the walls behave in a certain way, and as soon as there is a picture with a face watching them, they change behavior. Already the feeling of being watched already does that. So knowing about surveillance, no matter how much you feel you have nothing to hide, changes what you do. And I think that is a very bad effect of surveillance, because it literally destroys freedom, the freedom to do what you want to do, because you will do what you think is expected of you by whoever is watching. This is a very general implication, and then there is of course much more specific implications when we look at societies where surveillance is being exercised to actually harass and to legally, what's the word in English? to I think we're going to need to cut that because I just can't think of the word right now. That the other way or the other kind of problems, or one other kind of problem, I think is very obvious by how regimes or any kind of law enforcement is using surveillance to control political actors, political movements, any kind of rights activists, basically, or communities at risk. In trying to surveil what they do to create a law case or any other, even if there is not a legal state. Just look at the very obvious cases of Finn Fisher Trojan viruses used in Bahrain or Saudi Arabia, for example, to destroy whatever little bit of opposition there is in that country. Yeah, I think these are the two big areas of concern for me when you talk about surveillance, and then what maybe plays a bigger role in, for example, Europe, where we have data retention laws, and each member nation of the European Union is expected to have data retention laws, meaning that all the metadata of phone calls need to be stored to later be accessible for law enforcement, and another case is censorship of certain websites, which generally is started and being argued that certain types of pornography, child pornography, for example, should not be visible online, and this is something that most people accept as something that needs to be done, meaning in a way that there is control and surveillance of internet usage, and as soon as that is generally acceptable, then it's being extended to other topics that are also then considered to be the subject of law enforcement activity in some way or another. I think I am no terrorist, and I think I have lots to hide, because I think there's a lot of things in my life that are just nobody's business than my own. And personally, I have been through the experience of having anti-terrorism surveillance directed at me, because my partner was suspected to be a terrorist, and so we had a lot of surveillance, even though there is no terrorists in our family. And so I have a very personal perspective on why that is not such a great idea to use surveillance in order to catch terrorists. I think that is something that is used by governments and law enforcement as a means to have more and more ways to surveil society. But I think in most cases this is just not true. This is police and again, government structures that just want to have more control and more knowledge about people. But at least if I look at the relation between how many anti-terrorism laws and regulations we have seen introduced in the past now 12 years since 9/11 in Europe, and how many terrorist attacks have happened or been prevented in a way that is it is understandable to me that actually that prevented terrorist attacks. I don't see that this matches at all. We have so many restrictions, we have so much surveillance, and we have so little of this type of danger as far as I can see. And I'm sure we would be presented more proof if there was any. That I think there's really other reasons for this kind of surveillance than actually preventing terrorism. I mean, in Germany there is way more people who die because of traffic accidents than there is a visible danger of terrorist attacks, and we are not putting 1% of the money and control into creating a better traffic situation, which tells me that there is other reasons for all that surveillance than just the prevention of terrorism. Do we have internet freedom? Some of us do. The very privileged ones have a little bit of it, and unfortunately I think it's decreasing as more and more of the infrastructure of the internet is being controlled by very few companies and enterprises, which are trying very hard to destroy the principle of net neutrality, for example, which means that specific services are being privileged over others, which means, for example, that you will much faster be able to access a YouTube video than you will the encrypted chat that you need to communicate with people that are somewhere else. So if that actually happens, I don't really see so much of an internet freedom, because it used to be that data were treated equal, and that is being reduced currently very much. And in addition to that, I think, of course, the digital gap plays a big role, or the different digital gaps that we have play a big role in whether we have or can consider that to be internet freedom. People who have access to technology, who have access to hardware, who have access to the English language, who have time to actually be spent on the internet, have more internet freedom than people who don't have that. And so I think we have some internet freedom, but it could be a lot more.